My name is Margaret Lawson, and I am 98 years old. My children stopped visiting me a long time ago. And if you have ever felt quietly forgotten by the people you once lived your whole life for, I hope you will stay with me for a moment and tell me in the comments where you are listening from, because there is something I learned in that silence that I never expected to understand. For most of my life, my home was never quiet. It was a place where doors opened and closed all day, where someone was always looking for a missing shoe, a school notebook, or a slice of bread that had mysteriously disappeared from the kitchen counter. I raised 3 children in this little house, and every corner of it once carried a voice. Those days felt endless when I was living them, but now I understand they were the shortest days of my life. There was a time when mornings began before the sun. I would stand in the kitchen in my robe, packing lunches, frying eggs, tying shoelaces, listening to complaints about homework and arguments about who got the window seat in the car. Those days felt endless when I was living them, but now I understand they were the shortest days of my life. Back then, I believed something many parents believe without ever saying it out loud. I believe that if you give everything to your children, one day they will come back and give some of it to you. Not money, not gifts, just time, just presence.
My husband Robert used to laugh when I said that. He would sit at the end of the table with his coffee and say, "Margaret, children grow forward, not backward." I thought he was being pessimistic. I thought love would bend the rules. Robert passed away when I was 72. After that, the house grew quieter, but the children still visited then. Birthdays, holidays, Sunday dinners. The grandkids ran through the hallways the same way their parents once had, and for a while, it felt as though life had simply shifted shape, not disappeared. But life keeps moving, even when we try to hold it still. The grandchildren grew up. My children grew older too.
Careers expanded. Families moved to different cities. Schedules became crowded with responsibilities I could barely keep track of. At first, the visits simply became less frequent. Instead of every Sunday, it was once a month. Then it was holidays. Then sometimes a phone call that came while someone was driving to pick up groceries or sitting in a parking lot outside an office building. I told myself this was normal. I told myself everyone becomes busy. But the truth has a way of revealing itself slowly. The first time I truly felt it was on my 95th birthday. She sounded rushed but kind. She wished me a happy birthday and promised we would celebrate soon. Soon never arrived. After that year, the visits stopped almost entirely. No arguments happened. No harsh words were exchanged. Nothing dramatic ever occurred. They simply stopped coming. I remember waking up that morning and sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. The house was completely still. Outside the window, a delivery truck rolled down the street and a neighbor walked his dog, and I waited for the phone to ring. It rang in the afternoon. My daughter called for a few minutes.
She sounded rushed, but kind. She wished me a happy birthday and promised we would celebrate soon. Soon never arrived. After that year, the visits stopped almost entirely. No arguments happened. No harsh words were exchanged. Nothing dramatic ever occurred. They simply stopped coming. Sometimes weeks passed without hearing anyone's voice. At 98 years old, you learn something strange about time. The days are long, but the years move like a train you cannot catch. In the beginning, I spent many hours wondering what I had done wrong. Had I been too strict when they were young? Had I said something years ago that stayed with them longer than I realized? Had I somehow made myself difficult to visit without noticing? When you sit alone long enough, your mind becomes very skilled at inventing explanations. One evening, about 2 years ago, I was sitting in the living room with a photo album on my lap. It was one of those thick old albums with plastic sheets and yellowing pages. Inside were pictures from decades ago. There was Robert in his garden hat. There were my children on their first day of school. There was a photo of our living room in 1978 with Christmas wrapping paper covering the floor. I noticed something in those photos that I had never paid attention to before. In every picture, the children were facing forward, always forward, looking towards something else. The camera caught them for a moment, but their lives were already moving in another direction. That night, I finally remembered what Robert used to say. Children grow forward, not backward. And for the first time, I stopped asking the question that had been sitting in my chest for years. Why don't they visit me anymore? Instead, I asked a different question. What do I do now? At 96, most people think your story is finished. But something interesting happens when you stop waiting for the phone to ring. You begin to notice the world again. The first thing I did was something very small. I started opening my front curtains earlier in the morning. For years I kept them closed most of the day, mostly out of habit. But once I pulled them back, sunlight began filling the room again, and with it came the quiet rhythm of the neighborhood. I began recognizing people I had never really noticed before. A young mother pushing a stroller past my house every morning. An elderly man who walked the same brown dog at exactly 4 in the afternoon. Teenagers riding bicycles after school. I realized something simple but surprising. Even when your family grows distant, the world itself is still full of people living their lives right outside your window. So one day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I stepped outside and sat on the front porch. At first, nothing happened. People walked past politely, nodding the way neighbors do when they are not quite sure who you are. But eventually, the young mother with the stroller stopped. She asked how long I had lived in the house. I told her, 63 years. Her eyes widened, the way people's eyes always do when they hear a number like that. After that day, she began stopping more often. Then the man with the brown dog introduced himself. His name was Harold. He was 81 and lived 2 streets over. Within a few months, something strange had happened. The quiet house, where no one visited, had slowly become a place where people occasionally stopped by. Sometimes Harold brought tomatoes from his garden. Sometimes the young mother knocked on my door because she needed someone to hold the baby while she ran back home to grab something she forgot. None of these people were my children, but they were human beings, and they were present. One afternoon, Harold said something that stayed with me. He said, "Margaret, loneliness isn't always about being alone. Sometimes it's about waiting for the wrong people." I thought about that for a long time. For years, I had been sitting inside this house, waiting for 3 specific voices to come through the door again. But the world had been offering me other voices all along. I had simply been too focused on the absence to notice the presence. Now my days look very different than they did before. In the mornings, I still make tea and sit by the window, but now I watch the street with curiosity instead of expectation. Sometimes the young mother waves. Sometimes Harold stops to talk about the weather. Occasionally one of my children calls. And something inside me has changed about those calls. I no longer measure love by how often someone visits. I measure it by the kindness that still exists when they do. Last winter, my oldest son came by unexpectedly. It had been almost 2 years since I had seen him in person. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that many people his age look now. We sat in this same living room for nearly an hour. He apologized for not visiting more often. He talked about work, about his children, about responsibilities that seemed to pile up faster than he could manage them. And I realized something I had not fully understood before. My children were not staying away because they had stopped loving me. They were simply living the complicated lives that adults build without realizing how crowded those lives will become. When he stood up to leave, he hugged me the same way he did when he was a boy leaving for school. Quickly, awkwardly, with affection that felt both familiar and distant. After he left, the house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet, not the heavy quiet of abandonment, just the normal quiet of a home at the end of the day. At 98 years old, I have learned something that took almost a century to understand. Love does not always return to the place where it started. Sometimes it moves outward into the world in ways we cannot follow. But that does not mean your life becomes smaller. It only means you must learn to open your door in different directions. So if you are sitting somewhere tonight, feeling the kind of silence I once felt, waiting for someone who never seems to arrive, I want to tell you the truth I discovered on this front porch. The world is still passing by your window, and sometimes the next meaningful conversation of your life is not the one you have been waiting for. It is the one you have not yet allowed to happen. Because even at 98, a life can still grow in quiet and unexpected ways, as long as you remember to step outside and sit where the world can find you.